Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're going to look under the hood of the Aztec Empire right after 1428. I want you to think of it not just as some ancient civilization, but as this highly complex, tightly wound mechanical operating system. We're going to examine how two key rulers, Itzcoatl and especially his successor, Moctezuma I, introduced this series of radical interconnected reforms. And these weren't just random rule changes. They were specifically designed to strengthen the state and fuel an incredible, unstoppable machine of imperial expansion. So it all starts with a fundamental problem, one that a lot of massive organizations actually face today. How exactly do you control an empire that grows way too fast? Because the military success under Itzcoatl Moctezuma I was frankly staggering. But that very success created an empire so massive that their old ways of governing, they just totally broke down. They needed a massive system upgrade.
To understand how they pulled off this massive upgrade, here's our roadmap. We're going to look at the core problem of their expansion, how they cultivated a warrior society, enforced a strict social order, completely rewrote their religion and bureaucracy, and finally, we'll see how all these pieces locked together to create the engine of empire.
Starting with Part 1, the problem of expansion. Because as it turns out, wildly successful military expansion is a massive logistical headache.
What's really wild here is just how compressed this whole evolution was. The major expansion of Aztec power really kicks off right around 1428 under a ruler named Itzcoatl. Fast forward to 1440, he dies, and his nephew, Moctezuma I, takes over. Now, Moctezuma was a highly experienced military commander, and it fell squarely on his shoulders to build a totally robust state apparatus to manage all these new distant territories, all before his reign wrapped up in 1469.
And this required a massive foundational shift. Our sources point out a really stark contrast here. Early Mexica society was actually surprisingly humble. It was heavily based around farming, and get this, it was relatively democratic. But you just can't run a sprawling tribute-collecting military empire using a localized farming government. It just doesn't work. So to survive their own success, the Aztecs had to fundamentally alter who they were as a people.
Which brings us right to Section 2, cultivating a warrior society. Because if you need a massive military to hold your brand new territory together, you have to fundamentally change the minds and goals of your citizens.
To actually sustain all of this expansion, warfare literally had to become the absolute center of Aztec life. It became the primary path to everything: political power, economic wealth, social status. But here's the catch. You can't just force people to fight endlessly. You have to make them actually want to fight. The state had to heavily sell what our source calls the imperial dream to the entire population.
So how exactly do you do that? Well, education. The Aztecs established mandatory public schools, specifically the Telpocalli and the Comicac. And we have to be clear here, this wasn't education for personal growth or enlightenment. This was a factory system. It was perfectly designed to just churn out warriors and profoundly loyal citizens, directly exposing kids to the state's imperial ideology basically from day one.
The curriculum they ran was intense. We're talking strict discipline, weapon skills, deep religious devotion, and a heavy focus on civic duty. This education directly fed the military machine. The state basically created a brilliant, if pretty brutal, incentive structure. A man's social position was completely tied to the number of captives he could physically take in battle. So personal advancement was flawlessly aligned with the state's insatiable need for expansion.
Let's jump into Section 3, enforcing strict social order. You have to ask yourself, when you create this highly militarized, booming population where literally everyone is aggressively trying to climb the social ladder through warfare, how on earth do you keep society from descending into total chaos?
Well, Moctezuma I's answer was the 16 Laws. He introduced these highly specific laws to strictly regulate public morality and social behavior. He cracked down hard on things like drunkenness, theft, and public disorder, all to dramatically increase centralized control. But he didn't just invent new rules out of thin air. He also reorganized their existing community groups, which were called calpulli, making them way more efficient at meeting the state's massive demands.
The crucial takeaway here is that these laws didn't just create order, they deliberately deepened social divisions. You see this incredibly fierce hierarchy emerge. On one side, you have the peopleteen. These are the nobles. They're exempt from tribute, they get the best education, and they hold all the top jobs as judges and administrators. On the flip side, you have the Walton. These are the commoners, the ones providing tribute through goods and physical labor with heavily restricted political power. By elevating the peopleteen so high, Moctezuma absolutely secured the unquestioning loyalty of his administrative class.
And they didn't just write these class differences down on a piece of paper, they made them fiercely, aggressively visible. The state literally restricted access to prestige items. Only the higher classes could wear cotton clothing or even build two-story houses. Honestly, imagine getting punished by the government just for adding a second floor to your house. Our sources even note that different classes weren't allowed to mix in the same rooms of the palace. It is a terrifyingly brilliant example of using physical, visual laws as psychological tools to strengthen political control.
Okay, moving right into Section 4, rewriting religion and bureaucracy. We've talked about the schools and the laws, but to truly lock down their control, the Aztec state used administration and belief systems as twin tools. They wanted to dominate not just the physical world, but the spiritual one too.
Let's look at the physical administration first. 38. That is the exact number of distinct administrative provinces Moctezuma established. And that number would eventually balloon up to 55. We are talking about peak centralization here. He deployed government bureaucrats and permanent military garrisons to these far-off locations to assert control. So this was no longer just some loose alliance of cities. This was a permanent, entrenched imperial system specifically engineered to extract wealth from afar.
But, as any good emperor knows, just controlling territory isn't enough. You have to control the narrative. Under the guidance of a highly influential advisor named Tlaquilel, the state literally rewrote history. Old historical texts were intentionally gathered up and destroyed. In their place, they forged a completely new narrative, one that totally erased those humble farming origins we talked about earlier, and legitimized Tenochtitlan's absolute supremacy. They elevated specific gods like Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl, and Tezcatlipoca, perfectly weaving religion and warfare into one undeniable, state-sponsored truth.
And this all builds into this incredible, honestly terrifying ideological loop. Think about it like this. Step 1, military conquest. You go out and take captives from groups like the Aztecs. Step 2, temple construction. You use the massive wealth from those victories to fund the expansion of giant temples, like the Templo Mayor. Step 3, religious sacrifice. The Aztecs firmly believed large-scale human sacrifice was structurally necessary to sustain the universe. Therefore, to keep the literal universe alive, you need more sacrifices, which of course demands more military conquest. Warfare just gained the ultimate religious justification.
Let's move to our final section, the engine of empire. This is the grand synthesis. It's time to bring all these incredible pieces together and see how every single one of these individual reforms functioned as a perfectly synchronized gear in one giant machine.
The final analytical takeaway from our source here is so brilliant. None of Moctezuma I's reforms existed in isolation. They were entirely interconnected in this inescapable feedback loop. Look at the flow. Conquest brings in wealth. That new wealth necessitates a stronger state with a rigid social hierarchy just to manage it all. To maintain that rigid state, you absolutely need militarization, which you get through compulsory public schools and a rewritten aggressive religion. And what is the sole purpose of that militarized society? More conquest. Every single reform was meticulously designed to feed the next phase of expansion.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on. Was Aztec expansion just an inescapable cycle of their own making? By so perfectly engineering every aspect of their society, their schools, their laws, their history, and even their gods, to fuel an empire, did they basically code an operating system that was destined to just keep expanding until it couldn't anymore? It is a truly fascinating lesson on the absolute mechanics of power and state building. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this gives you a whole new lens to view how empires, both ancient and modern, are truly built.